Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Mastering Midlife, How to Thrive When the World Asks the Most of You. I'm your host, Mark Silverman. I want to thank you for joining us today. I am speaking to Randy Essex of the Detroit Free Press. Randy wrote an article a few weeks ago called Suicide in America, the Dark Side of the American Dream Killing White Men. He's usually covering presidential politics, the auto industry, but this is a pretty deep and troubling topic that he tackled, and he got a lot of interesting feedback on it, both from the racial part and also from just being able to confront this. Randy, thank you so much for being on the show.
Sure, thank you.
What prompted you to write this article?
Well, we had a story here about a guy, I believe he was 55, who the initial story was that he had never missed work in 30 years and just came up missing one day. About a week later, maybe a little longer, his body was found in a secluded area, and authorities said it was suicide. And over the course of my life, my personal life and my career, that is not an uncommon story. I worked here from 2006 to 2011. During the recession here, I lived in an apartment building right across the street from General Motors headquarters, and a GM engineer jumped to his death from my building right before GM declared bankruptcy. Then I spent 3.5 years as the editor and publisher of a small newspaper near Aspen, Colorado. And one of the ironies that I discovered moving to the mountains is that suicide rates in the Intermountain or in the Mountain West are just extremely high. And the little newspaper group that I was part of did some stories on that, but the suicides were really distressingly common. If you were there for a year, you knew somebody, at least had met or were acquainted with somebody who committed suicide.
So you're talking about Colorado, Idaho.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that.
If you look at suicide rates by state across the country, Montana, Colorado, high elevation states are really high, and there is some research that suggests that hypoxia, which is the lack of oxygen in the blood, affects the way some people metabolize serotonin. But that still doesn't explain why this is essentially the rates of, and this is, I'd known a couple of people who had committed suicide earlier in my life. As I reached midlife, you know more people and you hear more such stories. A former coworker killed himself, I think it was just last year. But in Colorado, it was so common that we did some research, and 80% of suicides are men. 70% of all suicides are white men. The rate of suicide, deaths per 100,000 by age group, white men lead in almost every category. Native Americans have a fairly high rate, but women tend to not kill themselves as much, although the growth in the rate among middle-aged white women has increased pretty remarkably since 2000. And as I thought about this, I grew up poor, and I was the first person in my family to go to college. In a lot of ways, the American dream has come true for me. I mean, I'm not fabulously wealthy. I'm a journalist.
Right.
But, I have a good life. I've seen a lot of the country, and I don't worry about where my needs are coming from, and I actually think I'll be able to retire in a few years. So all that's good. but I do feel a sense of pressure, and I think a lot of people in my cohort feel a sense of pressure that we have no excuse for not succeeding. If you're uh, as I wrote in the article, if you're a little white boy, and we're not alone in being taught toxic things. I mean, other people are taught other things, and other people have to endure things that we don't have to endure. But basically, you're taught you can be anything you want to be, and the implication being, and sometimes it's more than implication, if you don't make it, you're not smart enough, you didn't work hard enough, you're not savvy enough, you're a failure, and it's your fault. And I think that a lot of white men feel that very acutely and are taught that, and that then if the pressures they haven't measured up, suicide becomes an option for way too many of us. And I think it's certainly an oversimplification, because the researchers say that 90% of suicides are diagnosed or undiagnosed mental illness. Certainly substance abuse plays a big role, but none of that, and gun culture plays a role, but none of that really explains why the rate among white males is more than double that of the population in general, and in many age groups is 3 times that of other groups. So there's something going on with white guys, and that's what I wrote about here. And I don't know if you want to get a word in edgewise, but the response that I got was really pretty humbling. I had, with some trepidation, I wrote it with some trepidation because I would hear everything's politicized now. So I thought I would hear from people who said, "How dare you imply that white men have privilege?" Because I did note that, look, doors are open for white guys. We don't experience people not hiring us or not promoting us or not letting us go places because of our race or our gender, and other people do. Black people have to teach their children to, if they're pulled over, to keep their hands on the steering wheel and not make any moves for fear of being shot. White children don't have to be taught that. So I thought I'd get criticism from that side, that, how dare you say that white people have privilege or that white men are vulnerable. And I thought I would get criticism from the, how dare you stand up for white men? They have all the privilege. What I got, I would say 80 to 90% of the responses I got from all over the country since this appeared on the USA Today website and in the print edition, was really an opening up. I feel like I almost gave a lot of white men permission to talk about something that we tend to not talk about. That's how we are. We don't talk about stuff. And it was people talking about their own experiences, talking about the need to be of service to others. I heard from a guy whose son and whose father talked about how he tries to be of use in his community and of help to other people, just to remind himself that he has value to other human beings. And we measure ourselves so much in what our bank account says or what stuff we have. I think that's part of the condition.
I would totally agree with you. I think this expectation that the American dream is for us, and that if we don't do it, there's something wrong with us, that we failed, and the myth of this American dream. When I sent you the note to entice you to be on this podcast, I sent you a little excerpt of me on stage talking about this topic. And it's actually how this podcast was born, because I was on stage and I went off script. And I just said, suicide is killing guys who look like me at record rates. And my voice cracked. And when I went on to talk about the pressures that men and women feel, it really solidified to me what it is I want to do with my coaching practice, but also with this podcast, is the pressures of the hustle and grind culture, of the you should make it, there's something wrong with you if you don't make it, is really killing people. And again, I'm not in my home office. I'm actually traveling now. We spoke before this. Ironically, I'm here because a family member is in trouble in this fashion, and it's breaking my heart. Then that the irony is we're talking about this and I am offsite dealing with this. And I've had so many people in my life who have done this. So what in the anecdotal responses, can you tell me what people are saying to you? Like you gave them an outlet to speak. So now what? They're speaking up. Now where do they go?
For one thing, we struck such a chord that we're having conversations here about how we can explore this topic more, how we can find new information, and how we can work to offer solutions. I think the thing, and I heard from some women, I heard from some Black men, and the common theme in terms of how to help really is that notion of finding value in things other than the material. So a lot of people talked about the importance of some sort of faith or spiritual practice, being of service in the community and doing volunteer work, working with kids, giving of ourselves to others in ways that maybe we had to do earlier in human history, when it was harder to close ourselves off and just kind of be focused on accumulating and our image and so forth. And it's made me think, you asked before we started, how it's affected me. And it has really made me think about those things that I've learned through. I had cancer when I was 52. It was highly curable, thank goodness. But that causes you to be retrospective, and I'm an ambitious person who has, tried for promotions and gotten some and not gotten some. And that idea of being defined by your work, it's like, my work is what I do and not who I am, is easy to get in theory, but when it hits, it's just like, I didn't get that promotion, so I'm crap. I'm not good at what I do. People don't like me. It's very easy to feel that. And I I once had sort of a life mentor who said, pride is what you think people think of you, and pride is potentially fatal. And what people talked about was so many people around the country and folks in different walks of life. I am struck by the importance of being able to be of service to others and to find value in ourselves other than through our work and through our accumulation. honestly. And I've had a couple of reminders of that, I guess, in my adult life. I quit drinking in 1990, and a big part of that is being part of a community, where you're willing to help other people in the same situation. And
I got sober in 1989, so
okay,
I relate.
okay. So you feel good about helping others, but we can still get caught up in career concerns and in the commercial everyday world and lose touch with that a little bit. I got cancer in 1990 when I was 52, throat cancer, highly curable. And it again reminded me of how willing people are to help and how important it is to both be willing to help people and to accept help, which I think that's a real challenge. Talking about white guys in particular, the way we're brought up, just I don't need your help. I can handle it myself, and it's taken as a sign of weakness if we reach out for help, want help, so forth. And I think one of the things that was really clear from the emails that I got was that I think I mentioned the columns sort of gave people permission to express themselves, and a lot of people did to me.
It's interesting that you say that, but and for me, I liken midlife, and I liken any sort of shift to being an alcoholic, to having to hit bottom in order to allow help and in order to allow something different to come in. And if you can somehow fool yourself into think you're handling it, and you handle it on your own and you keep it in yourself, it's often not until it's too late that we figure out that we're not alone, that we can have help, and that there's a different way of approaching life.
I think that today, the irony of the digital world is that in some ways we're more connected than ever. You and I are connected right now, in a sense, but really we're more alone, because we're often alone with our devices. There are a lot of studies that people are less likely to know their neighbors. We're cloistered in our various political or professional bubbles. And it takes effort to make the connections that I think were more natural in previous generations.
And by making those connections, where do you see that as a solution or a way to address the suicide rates?
Well, that's what helps. If I can talk to somebody and say, if I keep everything to myself and it just bounces around inside my brain, it gets worse and worse and worse. If I can talk to somebody who I trust about what's going on, it really takes the power away from it. So almost certainly that person is going to either be empathetic or, be able to talk about an experience that they had that they've been able to get through. And those are the connections that we need just to be human.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I love that thought. I can take myself to an AA meeting for the reasons of staying sober, and it's because I am. And the way I've made friends in those programs is my sponsor said, go make a friend. And I could go walk up to someone and say, I don't know how to ask you to be a friend, but I'm supposed to ask someone to be a friend, or make phone calls. I'm supposed to call someone. I don't know what I'm supposed to say, but I'm supposed to call. And you can be awkward like that. But if you can't go to a meeting room and go, to someplace and go, by the way, I'm just lonely.
Right.
I'm just feeling bad about myself that I lost this sale. There's very few places where you can go, I feel like a failure because I lost my job, and someone will actually sit and listen.
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
And so our conversation, your and my conversation, echoes so many of the conversations I have with people about the isolation. And they say that loneliness and isolation will affect your health exponentially more than eating junk food and smoking.
Although being alone, eating junk food and smoking is probably the worst combination, right?
Yeah, unless you're in a hotel room and you just got yourself a pizza and you got Netflix and you find that an absolute joy, which I did last week when I was having my issues. So this is great. I really appreciate you writing the article. It was very brave to write the article the way you did, and you said that you guys are exploring ways in which now that you've got such a response to the article that you can put out solutions, that you can put out things that might help. Have you found anything interesting that's coming up in your world?
Well, we're just launching a real examination of data so that we can find those spots in suicide that are changing or that really stand out. White male suicide accounting for 70% of suicides obviously is one. There's something different about the white male experience. And it also seems to be that we're rubbing off on other demographic groups because suicide's up for every age group and every racial group in the country since 2000. So we want to really take a deliberative approach to figuring out what trends we might be able to find and then how we might be able to tell those stories through humanity. So it's a long process. You know, we don't want to, there have been a lot of things written about suicide and we don't want to do something that's knee-jerk.
Mm. And so how can people follow you? So as you do more research and you put more information out, how can people follow you?
Freep.com, FREEP.com.
The Detroit Free Press. Near the Gannett, USA Today, and all those newspapers are very close to my heart. I started my career. My first big sale was to USA Today and Gannett, and that started my career way back when. So I'm appreciative. So I'm going to put all that in the show notes so that people can find you. They can find your byline and follow you, and your future articles. I really thank you for spending the time and writing this article.
Sure. Thanks, Mark.
To everybody else, thank you for taking the time and listening. I love you and have a great rest of the day.